So this doesn't happen very often, but as I am sitting here recording this episode, I got a text message from a friend of mine with a tweet that I had to go verify to see if this was true. And unfortunately, it is. So we have some breaking news here in the middle of the sound off. And this is from PWInsider.com, Mike Johnson. PW Insider is saddened to report that former ECW World Champion Sabu, real name Terry Brunk, has passed away at the age of 60. A cause of death has not yet been disclosed. Sabu had just worked his final match over WrestleMania weekend in Las Vegas at the GCW Spring Break show, defeating Joey Janela in a no-ropes barbed wire match. He appeared last weekend at the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance reunion show convention at the 2300 Arena, that's the former ECW arena, which appears to have been his final public appearance. So that came out of nowhere, and I'm very sorry to hear that. 60 years old is too young, and it's just weird because I didn't see the show, but I was aware that he had just had his most recent match. I mean, I think they were billing it as his final match against Joey Janela, and I remember he took that just brutal bump out of the ring because it was a no ropes barbed wire match, and he took this bump where he fell out of the ring, and it was a hard fall, like right on his head on the concrete outside. And I mean, he took some punishment in that match, and it felt like he knew if this was going to be his last match, he was going to go out the way that he wanted to. You know, and he was going to go out doing what he loved and being Sabu, and he certainly did. But I was not expecting to hear about this news today, so I'm kind of at a bit of a loss right now. Sabu, when I think of Sabu, there's a certain small group of wrestlers that I think of when I think of the rise of ECW. I think of Sabu. I think of Taz. I think of the Sandman. I think of Tommy Dreamer. Those are really like the core names that come to mind. Then I think of Raven. I think of Terry Funk as well. But Sabu is part of that group of wrestlers that made ECW what it was. That made ECW as extreme as it was. And he will go down as one of the most influential wrestlers of all time. There are different wrestlers that have had different influences on people over the years. Sabu definitely influenced a generation of wrestlers, and whether you want to say that was a good thing or a bad thing, because his style could be very reckless, you cannot say that he was not an influencer or a pioneer in the wrestling industry, because he absolutely was. And I was not watching ECW full time back then. I was a WWF guy, and I would flip over to WCW sometimes. And the only time I would really catch ECW in those early days, and I'm talking, this is after they became, Extreme Championship Wrestling. They were Eastern, and then they converted to Extreme. So like mid-90s, I would be one of those people here in New York who would be flipping channels sometimes if I was up, and 3 o'clock in the morning on MSG Network is when they would air ECW Hardcore TV. And he was one of the guys that would come up, him and Bill Alfonso, and then later on, he had the tag team with Rob Van Dam. He had a pretty legendary feud with Taz. But I would see Sabu doing all of this wild shit. And it's, again, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. And he's out there and he's doing, he did the Arabian Facebuster, and he was doing the triple jump moonsaults, and he was doing all these springboard moves. And rarely did it look pretty, but it got your attention because you're watching this guy do all of this just wild, dangerous shit. And you're like, this guy's out of his mind. I don't even know if he knows what he's doing. He's just coming up with stuff on the fly and doing stuff. And again, sometimes it would be botched. And I think he would say, or people would say that sometimes he would intentionally botch moves. And that's kind of one of the things he became known for as well. Like, it wasn't always pretty, and he would botch these jumps, but then he would go right back to it and do it again, and he would do this huge wacky dive out of the ring into the crowd. And it was just very violent. It was very extreme, so it was very apropos for ECW at the time. But he worked for every major company that you could think of throughout his career. I mean, ECW, obviously, but WCW, WWE. Like, it will never not be wild for me to think that he wrestled John Cena that one time, I know they had that one match. I want to say it was like a lumberjack match. And this was when they had the ECW revival. So around 2006. And there was a match between John Cena and Sabu. Like, you could not find two more diametrically polar opposite performers. And just to see them working together was just wild to me. So ECW, WCW, WWE, TNA, AEW. I don't think he wrestled a match, but remember he made that appearance in AEW a few years ago. FMW for Onita, AAA, CMLL, New Japan, All Japan. I mean, the list goes on and on. Every major promotion in the last 30 or 40 years that you can think of, Sabu has worked there and performed there in some form or fashion. But I talked about like how violent the matches were that he would have. And I did a whole segment once, many years ago here on the podcast for my This Week in Wrestling History segment. And I talked about the most violent match, probably most violent match in ECW history. And one of the most violent matches of all time is at that Born to be Wired event that they had at the ECW arena. And it was a barbed wire match with Terry Funk defending the ECW world title against Sabu. And the funny part about that is, if you just go by real names, it was Terry Funk against Terry Brunk was what the match was. But it's just a sick, twisted, just demented affair between these two. And nobody is going to look at that match and consider it like a Matt classic, because that's not what it was meant to be. It was violent. It was bloody. It was brutal. It's memorable for Sabu ripping his bicep open right down to the muscle. And Bill Alfonso was out there in his corner, and he's telling Fonzie, go find me some tape so I could tape this shit up and I can get back to the match. And he did. And Fonzie went to the back and he grabbed some tape, and they, taped the arm up, and he continued the match. And there was a point where Sabu, he got crotched on the barbed wire, and he wrapped the barbed wire around his body, and he was, doing dives wrapped in barbed wire and putting Terry Funk with a leg drop through a table, like crazy shit. Even right down to the finish of the match, because both guys were wrapped in the barbed wire and they were so tangled up, all Sabu could do was hold his shoulders down for the 3 count. And when the match was over, they had to go find wire cutters just to cut them free because of how tangled up they were in the barbed wire. And they wanted Sabu to go to the hospital, and he said, no, like, you're going to stitch me up right here. Like, no anesthesia, no nothing. And it was something like 100 stitches or whatever it was to close the wound. And that's, the famous story of him sending Fonzie to go find some super glue. And he did. He went to like a 7-Eleven or some overnight, bodega, whatever it was. And he got him a tube of just like some regular, like over-the-counter super glue that you would find in any store. And he's taping his arm up. Like, that's hardcore. That's what ECW was known for. And he was the pioneer of that. And I think he said this in an interview once, that was the most painful injury of his entire career. And he's had a lot of them. Like, he put his body through the ringer to the point where it was sad, in recent years seeing him. And even what little I saw of him in that last match with Joey Janela, he just seemed very out of it. I don't know what mental state he was in or what he was doing or drink. I don't know what was going on that day, but he looked like he had no business being in the ring. But when he was in the ring doing what he was doing, he was in his element, right? Because this is what he did for a living. This is what he spent so many years doing. And I mean, that match, though, that barbed wire match in ECW was so violent. Paul Heyman said that there would never be another barbed wire match in the company because he just could not subject anybody else to that level of brutality that we saw with him and Terry Funk that night. So that's one of many matches. I'm sure you're going to hear about it in the days and weeks ahead. There'll be tributes pouring into Sabu, and people are going to be recounting their memorable matches and moments of his career. There's an episode of Dark Side of the Ring, actually, this week is on the original Sheik. And Sabu was interviewed for us. So he's probably going to be all over that episode, and that's airing on Vice this Tuesday. So that's going to make that really depressing now to watch that episode. But somebody who certainly left his mark, not only on his body in multiple places, he was all scarred up, but left his mark on the wrestling industry. For better or worse, will ultimately be, a subjective thing, and each person will have their own opinion on his style and what he contributed to the wrestling business. But one thing you cannot say is that he did not put his body out there every single time he went out to the ring usually to his detriment, but he laid it all on the line every time you saw him out in that ring. And he will go down as one of the more memorable performers in history. And not only a pioneer of his style, but one of the guys who really brought ECW to the prominence in the mid to late 90s that it had. He was a very, very big part of that whole movement and that anti-authority rise, in your face and blood and gore and guts and violence and all of that, but also an innovator in many ways. You saw him do stuff out there, which really did legitimately look like he was trying some stuff on the fly just to see what he could invent and come up with. And he was very innovative in that way as well. Tommy Dreamer was known as the innovator of violence. Well, you could use that same name for Sabu. So I'm very sorry to hear about his passing. But again, this is all breaking as I'm speaking here, as I'm recording this show. And my thoughts are kind of all over the place here, but those are my initial thoughts on the passing of Sabu. As more information comes out in the days ahead, I'm sure I'll be talking more about him on the Sound Off.